Okay, hi! I'm Cherry and you've stumbled upon my channel, and today I'm going to be sharing with you the best poetry collections I read in 2020. Before last year, it's actually been a long time since I read poetry. Aside from you-know-who's poetry collections, poetry just wasn't as accessible until I got my Kindle, which is really timely too because when I went into reading slumps last year, but I was desperate to read, I always found myself turning to poetry. I think I read like 13 collections last year, and the ones I will be sharing with you today are 7 of the best ones in order of least favorite to most favorite. Anyway, here are 7 of the best poetry collections I read last year, starting from number 7. At number 7, we have Crush by Richard Siken. This is actually more like an honorable mention because this collection was definitely something else. Let's just say, reading this was a very unique experience, and as the only Achillean book I've read in forever, actually, I thought it deserved to be mentioned. Siken has a very unique way of telling stories, but he does it so beautifully, but some of his poems just felt a little all over the place and even seemed quite random sometimes, but I guess that's his artistic freedom. Still, I enjoyed it because his poems were very unapologetically queer and completely uninhibited, and I really love that about them. To be honest, the only reason I even picked this up was because Reads Rainbow, my favorite book blogger, made a post that matched Richard Siken's poetry to queer books. Anyway, that's how I discovered this collection. And I'll add the link to Reads Rainbow's post down at the description box down below, in case you're looking for more queer reads. You're in a car with a beautiful boy, and you're trying to tell him that you love him. And you're trying to choke down the feeling, and you're trembling. But he reaches over and he touched you, like a prayer for which no words exist. And you feel your heart taking root in you, like you've discovered something you don't even have a name for. I also really love this very specific line that says, "And the gentleness that comes not from the absence of violence, but despite the abundance of it." At number 6 is a poetry collection that came as quite a surprise, but a very pleasant one, and that's The Mermaid's Voice Returns in this one by Amanda Lovelace. I feel like this is the most popular poetry collection on this list. I read the first 2 collections in the series, The Princess Saves Herself in this one, and The Witch Doesn't Burn in this one. I did a review of all 3 books in the series on my book blog back when I was still active on my blog, so I'll link that down below as well if you're interested. In summary, the first 2 books were painfully mediocre. It feels a little unfair saying that because poetry is generally supposed to be very personal, but that's how the first 2 books read. They didn't even read very much like poetry, and Lovelace had this tendency to abuse the enter key. The 3rd book though, it was so amazing. Maybe because it resonated with me more than the first 2, but the fact that it elicited something in me in the first place when the first 2 did not just impressed me. The only reason I even read the 3rd book despite not liking the first 2 that much was because I was already invested and I already read the first 2 and the 3rd one was the last. At that point, it was just too late to turn back. But I was glad that I did read the 3rd book. Aside from Lovelace's poetry, The Mermaid's Voice Returns in this one also features a couple of other poets, which I thought was a very nice touch, and it made me realize that the poetry community is probably really small and they're all probably friends with each other, which is fun, I guess. The build-up from the mediocrity of the first book, the passable content of the second, that led to the incredible finale, made for a very interesting experience. Hopefully, Amanda Lovelace's new poetry series, Break Your Glass Slippers, will be much better. When you've walked on daggers your entire life, you don't even know how to trust the softness of sand between your toes. And the most relatable line to me as someone who suffers from bipolar disorder, mostly I just want to know what it's like to feel something between elation and despair besides nothing at all. The next poetry collection is something that I could definitely describe as a comfort read, and it's definitely something that I'll be coming back to quite often. It's Soft in the Middle by Shelby Eileen. This poetry collection was just so queer and kind and soft and so body positive. It also talks about sex in a very tasteful way. Reading it was akin to a best friend, a warm hug, or a security blanket. It felt like a safe space. It discussed body image without being triggering, and I think that's very important for people like me who suffers from eating disorders or simply body image issues, but still people who love to read about other people's experiences with their own body image. It really doesn't matter if I lose a few pounds, or 10, or 20, or 30. What is 30 pounds of ice of a glacier? When my mother says, "I think you've lost weight," I don't let it feel like a compliment anymore, because no matter what I lose, I'll never lose enough. And if I lose enough, I'll have lost everything. Eileen's other collection, Sunfish, did not hit as hard as Soft in the Middle, which is ironic considering, but it's also really good. I'm especially excited to get to Goddess of the Hunt, which is a collection told from the perspective of the Greek goddess Artemis. Also, another favorite quote of mine is one that reminds me of my best friend. "The world stacks the cons of being soft, but that doesn't stop me from reaching for the clouds while embodying them too." At number 4, we have There's Beauty in the Bleeding by Christina Hart. This collection is one of the most relatable things I've ever read. It's painfully personal, and reading some of the poems almost felt like being slapped in the face with like a brick. Because, you know, like they said, the truth hurts and the heart be spitting truths left and right. This book tackles very sensitive topics, so trigger warnings for that. According to the Goodreads page, there's content warnings for sex, violence, abuse, drugs, and addiction. God forgive me, I have sinned, and I'm sure I'll sin again. I may never understand why the things that are bad for me give me so much pleasure. I secretly enjoy the aftertaste of a beautiful letdown. The hell keeps me warm. I love the bittersweet chaos in the aftermath of my choices. And I can't stop now. There are too many mistakes left to be made in my name. I absolutely love that. That's probably my favorite part in the whole book, and I think at one point, I love the bittersweet aftermath of my choices was my Twitter bio for like a time. I just really love that line so damn much. By the way, I also read Empty Hotel Rooms Meant for Us, but I definitely enjoy There's Beauty in the Bleeding more by a definite long shot. This one was just so good. So many memorable and impressive quotes, and I am absolutely obsessed. I never said I wanted the voices to go away. I just wish they had nicer things to say. There's honestly so many more quotes that I want to share, but we'll be here forever. So I just urge you all to pick this one up. Actually, read everything on this list and then tell me which ones you enjoyed the most or related to the most. I'd honestly love to hear everyone's thoughts. Speaking of the next one, I think I just found my all-time favorite poet as of now. It's Trisha Mathier, and the next 2 books on this list are both written by her. First, let's talk about number 3, which is Honeybee. This collection talks mostly about heartbreak, and boy, does it hurt like a bitch. Honestly, I'm tempted to send some of the lines to my ex-girlfriend. So many of Mathier's one-liners just perfectly encapsulate how sometimes you find your soulmate, but that doesn't mean you end up together, you know? I am not sorry it's over, but I think my hands might always ache for the symmetry of yours. And I hope you understand that now as well as you used to. Maybe I just really like poetry that manages to make my heart do painful, clenchy things. Maybe I'm a masochist, and that's why This collection is at number 3. But for anyone that loves hugot lines, if you're Filipino, you know what that means, but I don't know what hugot is in English, but basically if you're like me and you have a tendency to enjoy the bittersweet pain of heartache, then this poetry collection is for you. Truly. I do not understand how love anchors people if I could never make you stay. At number 2, we have Aphrodite Made Me Do It, also by Trisha Mathier. I read this collection before I read Honeybee, and I just absolutely fell in love. That's why after reading Aphrodite Made Me Do It, I immediately scavenged for more of Trisha Mathier's work. The concept for Aphrodite Made Me Do It is actually pure genius. It's a sort of retelling. The poems weave past and present in Aphrodite's point of view and use the Greek goddess of love as the device for both empowerment and healing. It's actually extremely feminist in that sense. The same way she rose from the sea, you rise like a phoenix from the ashes of things that no longer serve you. This entire collection is honestly a unique take on love as a whole, and not just romantic love, but all kinds of love. It also offers a different but very beautiful perspective on love stories from Greek mythology. In Troy, they fought over Helen like children, but Achilles mourned Patroclus the way a soul mourns a body. Also, just a little reminder for everyone with toxic family relationships, love has little to do with blood relations and more to do with who you choose to bleed for. Finally, at number 1, if you've watched my latest tag video, then you probably already know that this is coming. I've been looking for an excuse to talk about this poetry collection for like the longest time, and I can finally say I have an all-time favorite poetry collection, and that's I Am Not Your Final Girl by Claire C. Holland. This poetry collection has one of the most unique concepts I have ever encountered. It takes the final girls, or the last surviving girls of horror movies, and turns each one of their experiences into poems. One of my favorite horror movie tropes is the final girl trope. So you can just imagine how excited I was to stumble upon this collection, and I was not disappointed in the slightest. My favorite line from the poem would have to be from Carrie, "But what good are we cast in white? I'd rather arm myself in blood than be a pretty statue to stare at." I think I made this my Twitter bio at one point too. Carrie is probably a very relatable poem for like many women, and is one of my favorites in the collection. The poem about Dana from The Cabin in the Woods is also incredible. They asked for slaughter, and all I could say was no. Drag it all down into the muck and fire. See how it rises up. So maybe this is how the world ends, not with a bang or whimper, but with revolution. If you're still not enticed, how about a line from Sally from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? There is nothing else in this world like realizing you're going to live and not being sure you can. I Am Not Your Final Girl combines horror and feminism perfectly well. It's just everything I could ever want in a poetry collection, or any piece of literature, honestly. I'm only sharing like quick lines, but the poems are pretty decent in length, and you get tons out of each one. After reading I Am Not Your Final Girl on Kindle Unlimited, I immediately went and bought myself my own digital copy, and honestly, you should too. It's super affordable, but it's worth so much more than its price, and it's just, you know, this is something I will definitely come back to every spooky season and the rest of the year, really, if we're being real. I need Claire C. Holland to write more. And those are my favorite poetry collections of 2020. This year, I'm trying to read at least 1 or 2 poetry collections each month, and hopefully next year, I'll come back bearing more amazing contemporary poetry. Although nothing might be able to beat I'm Not Your Final Girl at this point, okay, let's be real. But we shall see. But that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you pick up at least one of these poetry collections. And I will see you in my next one. Goodbye!